Got it. Vishnu? Good afternoon. I am Sanjay Gupta from IT department in IT Engineering College. Today I am going to discuss about the exception handling. Now, what is exception in OOPS? OOPS means object-oriented programming language. An exception or exceptional event is a problem that arises during the execution of a program. When an exception occurs, the normal flow of the program is disrupted and the program terminates abnormally, which is not recommended. Therefore, these exceptions are to be handled. Means, if we are going to in dictionary meaning, exception is as a abnormal condition which disrupt our normal flow of the programs. When we want to execute our program, if we write any logic, if there is any type of exception that does not provide the exact output which we want, this type of condition is called exception. And exception can occur for many different reasons, such as a user has entered an invalid data, a file that needs to be opened cannot be found, a network connection has been lost in the middle of communication, or the JVM has run out of memory. Means these are 3 points is the main reason of for exception in any Java programming language or any object-oriented programming language. The first one is the invalid data. If a programmer or any user writes the logic and that logic accepts any data and that data is not compatible with that particular format, in that condition that will arises the exception. And if we write any class or any object and we write the that objection that objects or that programs with another name, in that condition file not found exception will arises, or there may be as a system crash, JVM out of memory, that condition also provide the exception. Some of these exceptions are caused by user errors, other by programmer error, and others by physical resources that have failed in some manner. On the basis of these, there are three categories of exception: checked exception, unchecked exception, and errors. The first one I'm going to explain about the checked exception. A checked exception is an exception that is checked by the compiler at compilation time. These are also called as compile time exceptions. These exceptions cannot simply be ignored. The programmer should take up these exceptions. Means checked exception comes at the time of compile time. There is no any syntax error, no any logical error, but at the compilation that will arises, there is some any problems, and due to this reason that is not going to compile. This type of errors is called checked exception. For example, if you use file reader class in your program to read data from a file, if the file is specified in its constructor doesn't exist, then a file not found exception occurs, and the compiler prompts the programmer to handle the exception. Here I'm write a program as a import.java.io file, import java.io file reader, public class ex, public static void main string args, or here we write a constructor of file as a file is equal to new file, and in the file constructor we pass the a file as a file.txt, but I have no any file of the file.txt, only we write the name of file.txt in E drive, but there is no such type of any file available in my that drive. But here we only write the name of files, and again we want to open this file as a file reader. Fr is equal to new file reader file. Here when we compile as a java c x.java, in that condition in this program no any syntax error, but when we compile, then this will arise as a exception, file not found exception. Or yet, this file not found exception will arise due to file.txt file. Because compiler does not find the file as a file.txt, in that condition, this arises the file not found exception at the compile time. Here, I'm again tell you that here is no any syntax error. Or where we found the such type of exception, here compiler arises the indication as a file reader fr is equal to new file reader file. Means file does not find as the file.txt. This type of exception is called checked exception. Second is the unchecked exception. An unchecked exception is an exception that occurs at the time of execution. These are also called as runtime exception. These include programming bugging, such as logic errors or improper use of an API. Runtime exceptions are ignored at the time of compilation. Unchecked exception always occurs at the time of execution. For suppose, I have write a division logic in our program. There if we put as a divider by 0, if we write the logic for the division and divider is 0, in that condition, that will arise the exception. Or this exception does not arise at the compile time. But when we execute such type of program, then that will arise the exception, or such type of exception is called unchecked exception, or it is the type of arithmetic exception. Here we write as another program. Here we use an array and the size of this array is 4. Or here we want to retrieve the element which is situated at the 5th position. But there is only 4 elements, not 5 elements. But we want to try 5th element. In that condition, there is no any logical error, syntax error, or API error. But when we want to execute this type of program, in that condition, this provides the exception. Here, public class ex1, public static void main string errors, int num array is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, means I have only the 4 elements, and we want to retrieve 5th element. System.out.println. When we go for the compilation, there is no any type of exception or any type of errors. But when we execute, in that condition, this provides the array index out of bounds exception. Because we have only the 4th element, not 5 elements, but we want to try only 5th elements. So there is no 5th elements available in our array. In that condition, this logic, this program execute the exception, and the type of this exception is called as array index out of bounds exception, and this type of exception is called unchecked exception. Third one is the errors. These are not exception at all, but problems that arise beyond the control of the user or the programmer. Errors are typically ignored in your code because you can rarely do anything about an error. For example, if a stack overflow occurs, an error will arise. They are also ignored at the time of compilation. Means error is also the type of checked exception, but this is not the, we can say this is the pure exception, but comes under the category of as a exception. Exception hierarchy. All exception inherits by the java.lang throwable class. Means java.lang.throwable class is the root class of Java exception hierarchy. And all exception is subclass of throwable class. Means here we draw the diagram of checked, unchecked, and error exception, which are directly inherited by the throwable. Throwable class inherited by the exception and error. Again, Exception has the IO exception, SQL exception, class not found exception, runtime exception. In the runtime exception, there is also arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, index out of bounds exception. That is also many types of index out of bounds exception is the array index out of bounds exception, string index out of bounds exception, etc. These all types of is comes under the exception class. And errors. In the errors, stack overflow error, virtual machine error, out of memory error. These are comes under the error. Uh, Except the runtime exception. Except the runtime exception, IO exception, SQL exception, class not found exception is known as known as checked exception. IO exception, SQL exception, and class not found exception. Except runtime exceptions are comes under the checked exception. Only runtime exception is comes under the unchecked exception. And these are all subclass of throwable class. Now, if we want to handle now, if we want to handle this type of exception, Java provides the 5 types key. Using of these 5 types of key, we handle the exception handle. Means if we want to get continuous flow of our program without any interruption, in the case of erosion of any type of exception, we use the 5 keys. Those 5 keys are try, catch, finally, throw, throws. These are 5 keywords which we use to handle our exception in our Java programs or any object-oriented programming language. So here, where we use the try block, where we use the catch block, where we use the finally block, where we use the throw block, and where we use the throws keyword. These are the some there is a rule we must follow. Try block. The try keyword is used to specify a block where we should place an exception code. The try block must be followed by either catch or finally. Means if we want to use try block in that condition, we write all our logics in our try block, and the exception will arise in this try block. Means try block we use for the exception arising. Always remember, when we write any logics, in that logics, any mistakes or any mismatch or any memory problems in that condition, any condition will disturb our program, and that will disturb in our logics, and that logics must be right in our try block. And all try blocks always preceded by the catch block. A catch block only handle the exception which is arises in our try block. Means the exception will handle in the catch block which is arise in the try block. So we use in catch block to handle only, not write the any logic in our catch block. We only write the handle of exception which is arises in our try block. So second is the catch block. Catch block is used to handle the exception. It must be preceded by try block. It can be followed by finally block. Means we can, if we want to write any finally block, that finally block must be right after the catch block. So next keyword provided by the oops is finally. The finally block is used to execute the necessary code of the program. It is executed whether an exception is handled or not. Here, the finally block is not going to execute, is not going to handle exception which is arises in try block. Finally block always executed in both conditions. Means the exception is arises or not. If exception is arises, in that condition, finally block will execute. If exception is not arises, then also finally finally block must be executed. Means in the finally block, we write always necessary code which are must to execute in both conditions. That code written in the finally block. And then we use the next keyword as a throw. Throw keyword is used to throw an exception. Means if you want to throw any manually exception in that condition, we use the throw keyword. And next is the throws. Throws keyword is used to declare exception. It specifies that there may occur an exception in this method. It does not throw an exception. It is always used with method signature. We can say that throws keyword only handle temporary. It does not handle the permanent of any methods. Due to this reason, this is always right with the method signature. But that method is calling another place. In that condition, there is necessary to handle again exception. If we doesn't handle in that condition, so there will be arise exception which is temporary handled another place. So when we use the throws keyword to handle any exception, in that condition, again, if that method is called another place to execute of that particular method, in that condition, we must again handle the throws, either using the try catch block or again by using the throws keyword. These 5 keywords we use to handle our exception. In these 5 keywords, finally and throw doesn't handle the exception. Finally, we'll execute that necessary code which we want to execute in both conditions. Either arises the exception or not. And throw keyword, if we want to manually arises any exception in our program, in that condition we use the throw keyword. And if we want to include more than one catch, means there is many exception handler want to use in our catch block, we can write. So in a single try block, there are many catch block can be used. But using the many catch block, in that condition, we must always write the superclass of all exception in last catch block. If we write the in first catch block or the first superclass of catch block, in that condition, available are that particular exception handle in our catch block will not execute. And if we want to use manual any exception, in that condition we must extend the exception class. Means we are not going to execute, we don't want to use the checked unchecked exception which is available as a predefined in Java programs or OOPS concept. We want to use our own exceptions. In that condition, we can also write this type of exception, always extending the exception class. Means only there is one option to inherit the exception class. Inheriting the exception class, we can write the exception and can be used in our programs, in can our logics, in can our projects. Thank you. That's it. Okay.